As I was reading some people coming in, did we read all the verses today?
Yes.
All 18 of them?
Not all 18.
Not all 18. We didn't read them. I didn't think so. It wasn't the plan to read them, but I wanted to read them with you. One of the things that we've been doing this year is going through 52 stories that we're in the middle of that form our faith and foundation. And I am going to talk about it, and it's almost maybe sound repetitive, but I want you to hear it as it's recorded in the scriptures. And so Barb's going to bring this up. These are from the New International Version this week. So chapter 20, starting on verse 1. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciples, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but did not go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. The cloth was still laying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple, who had reached the tomb first, also went inside. He saw and believed. They still did not understand from the scripture that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. Now Mary stood outside the tomb, crying. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated there where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They have taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was Jesus. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. It is tradition. We like to follow traditions, don't we? I find myself following all kinds of traditions. It's tradition to begin April by trying to fool someone. I like that tradition. I like to take people down the primrose path just to see how far I can lead them and see when they finally wake up to it. You can't get in trouble doing that. I served a church in Lubbock, and we had the carpet being replaced. And it didn't get done during the week, and so we came in on Sunday and there was no carpet. And one of the girls in the youth group I was leading had come in, and I said, "Oh, Brandy, you're not going to believe this. Someone snuck into the church and they stole the carpet." And Brandy got so upset she went to tell her parents. And her parents got really upset that we would even try to fool Brandy because she was a little bit gullible. And fortunately, she came in and she got really upset at my youth sponsor instead of me. I just started making a little distance. It's something fun, but at the same time, nobody likes to be made a fool, right? I mean, it's one thing to delight ourselves, but no one wants to be on the other end of that fun. We don't like someone to make a fool of us. And so on days like April Fool's Day, we tend to be a little extra careful, a little suspicious of almost anything that anyone says. But just because this tradition makes us a little skeptical of what we hear, doesn't mean that something out of the ordinary, something unbelievable, something even impossible that gets announced on a day like April Fool's Day isn't really true. For example, back in 2015, there was a huge underground fire in London. You may have read about it. As a result, there were lots of businesses in that downtown district who lost all of their power, and so it was being covered in all the news reports telling people, don't go down there. All the stores are closed. They don't have electricity, and they were trying to avoid that. People heard the stories, and then they checked their calendar, noted that it was April 1st, and just thought it was a big joke. And so they all went down there as usual to those businesses, and when they got there, lo and behold, the stores were really closed. In my estimation, they didn't believe the truth, so they were the ones who were foolish. In a similar way, back in 1946, the tsunami siren sounded on the northeastern shores of the Big Island in Hawaii. Again, the people heard the sirens. They checked their calendars, and it was April 1st. And so they believed it was a joke. I can't imagine anyone really making a joke out of sirens, but that's what they did. The wave came in, it swept more than 1,300 homes away. It ended up killing 159 people in a matter of moments. The consequence of being foolish on that occasion, tragic. And the consequences of being foolish when it comes to the gospel message can be equally tragic. There's also a BMW dealer in New Zealand who decided to release an advertisement that ran the last week of March, and the title in the paper was April Fool's Day Special. The ad said in these big, bold letters, be the first person to bring your car along with this coupon into the BMW New Market dealership on April 1st. Ask for Tom, and we'll swap your old car, whatever it is, for a brand new BMW. No questions asked. When Tiana Marsh read that advertisement in the New Zealand Herald, she really wanted it to be true. She wanted it to be true because she really needed a new car. She couldn't afford one. She decided to cast her common sense aside, and she convinced a friend to go with her to be the very first ones at the dealership. They arrived shortly after 5 a.m. and waited for the staff to arrive. While they waited, she started wondering, is this just a big joke? Maybe I need to leave because I don't want to be made the fool. What if they just give me a Matchbox BMW? Maybe it's that kind of a thing. She nearly talked herself out of it, but she decided to stay. And much to her surprise and relief, the ad turned out to be a real offer. She got to trade in her 15-year-old Nissan for a brand new BMW 1 Series worth about $50,000, and she paid nothing for it. The story was covered, of course, giving the dealership lots of free advertising, which is what they were really after. And the reporter started interviewing people who didn't go, and they all made it clear that they missed out on this unbelievable, sounded too good to be true offer because they just didn't want to be made to look like a fool. But they were happy for Tiana. The Bible story that we're looking at today didn't happen on April Fool's Day, but it did happen on the first day of the week, which happened to be the 16th of Nisan. It was the third day since Jesus had died on the cross. There was no question about his death. He had not fainted. He had not slipped into some coma. And even if he had, as some suggest today, the Roman guards had made sure that he was good and dead before taking him down by running a spear through him. There was no question about Jesus' death. And for most people today, they can believe that. They can believe that Jesus died. Jesus' dead body was taken down from the cross. Joseph and Nicodemus took it down, getting permission to do so. They laid it in a tomb that Joseph owned, one that had never been used. And they wrapped Jesus' body with linens. They put some spices in it to offset the smell they knew was coming. And they hastily rolled this stone over the tomb's opening. They were in a hurry because they wanted to entomb Jesus before the sun set. And if you recall, Jesus died late in the evening, so they didn't have much time to get him in before the Sabbath began at sunset. The Jewish leaders, thinking that the apostles might try to steal Jesus' body from the tomb in hopes of fooling everyone into believing that Jesus had raised from the dead, as he claimed, convinced the Roman governor to place his seal on the tomb and gave them permission to set guards at the tomb. They thought that it was a foolproof plan. There's no way the dead body is getting out there. Mary Magdalene, like the others who were close to Jesus, were in a state of shock when they watched Jesus die. They had no idea what their next step would be. They wanted to believe that Jesus would rise on the third day as he had promised, but they also knew that coming back from the dead was really sort of an impossible kind of thing. Sure, they had seen Jesus raise people from the dead. Even the most recent one was Lazarus, who had been in the grave for 4 days. They knew it was possible for Jesus to raise someone from the dead, but who was going to call Jesus from the grave? There wasn't anyone like him. There was no one to call him forth, no one who had that promise. And so the disciples were waiting for the third day, not with anticipation. They probably felt like everyone else who has lost a loved one, especially a loved one to a tragic event. Their plans for living together are shattered. Their hope of a bright future gone. They were grieving. They were in shock. They would have felt like any person grieving and in that shock stage. They would have been a little panicky, a little restless. Their emotions would have been bouncing all over the place. And on top of that, they were afraid for their own lives because those who had killed Jesus were probably going to come after them. Jesus had told them that they would. And that's something they could believe. The Sabbath ended when the sun set. We're told that Mary went out and bought spices to prepare Jesus' body for burial. I guess she didn't know what Joseph and Nicodemus had, or she probably thought those guys probably didn't know what they were doing. I need to go and do it right. And so early in the morning, she gets up and she gets her spices. She gets some close friends, and they head to do their work for the day on this first day of the week. Mary wasn't alone. But in our passage from John's version, he only speaks of Mary. John doesn't tell us whether she knew about the guards having been posted there or how she planned to move the stone, which she would have known would have been there, only that she was focused and single-minded and ready to do whatever she could to honor Jesus, even if it was after his death. John tells us that when Mary arrived, she sees the stone that had already been rolled away. The guards already gone. And John doesn't tell us whether Mary looked into the tomb at that moment or entered it at that moment as the other gospel accounts do. John just skips to she headed back into the news telling the disciples the stone is moved and Jesus' body's missing. The empty tomb for her in that moment, according to John, was not good news. Jesus said that she didn't know why, John, I should say, or who, that someone had to have taken Jesus' body. That's what she believed. John doesn't tell us of the assumptions that the Jewish leaders must have been making at the same time whenever those guards who were missing had shown up in their court and began to tell them that Jesus' body was also missing. Their assumption is that the disciples had pulled it off. They somehow got Jesus' body, and now they were going to pull this April Fool's joke on the world. Like Mary, the guards didn't know who had taken the body or why. But the Jewish leaders pay these guards to say that it had been the disciples. Money talks, but most of the time money lies. You can pay people to say whatever you want them to say, and they will. And these Jewish leaders had been doing it for a while. They knew how to pay people to say what they wanted so they could do what they wanted. But even well-crafted lies can't keep the truth from coming out. But when it does, those who have heard the lie and then hear the truth have to decide what they will choose to believe. Will they be foolish or will they be wise? When Peter and John heard from Mary that Jesus' body was missing, they run to the tomb to see for themselves. It doesn't tell us what they hope to find. Whether they're hoping to see the resurrected Lord or they're just trying to figure out where the body was. It doesn't explain any of the reason. It just says their immediate reaction is to run to the tomb. John gets there first, and he looks in. We're told that he sees the linen lying there, and in particular, the one that had been around his head is separated and it's rolled up. When Peter arrives, Peter, being Peter, just barges into the tomb, and John follows. John recalls, and John records in his gospel that this linen that should have just been crumpled up with the rest of it that had been around his head really is separated. It's an interesting detail for him to notice. It means little for us, but for John it seems to be a very significant detail. He could only think of one reason why this would have been done. The body hadn't been picked up and taken away. I mean, they would have taken all the linens and everything with it. If you're going to move a dead body, you're going to move all the fluids and everything that would be a part of it. You keep it wrapped up. And so for John, the linen is revealed to him. And he says in his record of his own recollections that it was at this moment when I see the linens there that I believed. He doesn't share those thoughts with anyone, just himself. He believes. Of all those who came to the tomb that morning, only John believes without seeing. It's a simple belief. But let me tell you, there is nothing wrong with a simple faith. John believed because Jesus had prepared him to believe by telling him in advance what was going to happen on that day. He even explained the ancient scriptures and the prophecy to him about how the Messiah, the Christ, is going to rise on the third day. But John admits that he wouldn't really understand those scriptures until sometimes later. I think we can learn a lesson there. We can believe that Jesus has risen from the grave. We can make him Lord of our lives without understanding everything about the Bible. We just need to keep it simple sometimes. Later that day, the risen Lord would walk along the road with those two other disciples going to Emmaus. And as they walked with him, they wouldn't recognize him. And since they didn't recognize him, they are sort of relating to him the events of that day. Can you imagine walking with Jesus and telling him about what happened? They talked about how we hoped that Jesus was going to be the Messiah. We hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And now he's killed, and now he's dead, and we don't know what to make of what's happened today. And then there were these women who'd gone to the tomb and they found it empty and they said that he was alive, but no one has seen him. That is, none of the men had seen him before they had left on this road to Emmaus. It was then that the resurrected Lord said to them, listen to this. This is what Jesus says to these two. They still don't recognize him. Oh, foolish men. Why are you so slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken? Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things so that he could enter into his glory? And then beginning with Moses and referencing all of the prophets, he explains to them concerning himself using the scriptures. I don't know about you, but that's one Bible lesson I wish I was around for. I would love to have heard Jesus explain himself with his own word. Peter and John, going back to them, leave the empty tomb. But Mary stays behind. She lingers. She couldn't really bring herself to accept that the body was missing and what to do, what she was to do next. She is swept up in her grief. It says that she is weeping. The word in the text here is a word to cry out, to grieve from the heart. She is broken. Perhaps it was to confirm that the tomb was really empty that she looks back into it. But when she does, John says it wasn't empty anymore. She sees two angels dressed in white, and still she doesn't recognize them. even though one is at the feet where Jesus' body had been laying and the other where the head would have been. They ask Mary, "Why are you sobbing?" We often have no clue what to say when someone's weeping, when they're crying, when we see them with tears. We want to comfort them, right? We want to come alongside them, but sometimes we just don't know what to say. We probably wouldn't take the angel approach. "Why are you crying?" Right? But she is honest with them. Someone has taken Jesus' dead body, and I don't know where it's at. Turning to leave, she sees Jesus' alive body, but she thinks it's the gardener. She doesn't recognize him. And so she asked him where he, being the gardener, had taken the body so that she could go and care for it. She must have looked away in that moment because John says that she has to turn back. She turns back because she hears Jesus speak her voice, "Mary." There's something in that part of the story that speaks to each of us. Don't we want to hear Jesus speak our name? Don't we long for him to speak to us in a way that we recognize it's him, the risen Lord, victorious over death, breaking through our misconceptions and the lies that we believed about him? Her eyes adjust. She sees and recognizes Jesus, and she compels herself toward him, evidently embracing him, because John says that Jesus has to tell her, "Stop clinging to me." But man, who would not want to? Jesus tells her, "I haven't ascended yet, but I am going to go to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." And I like that. We're not just talking about Jesus' Father and Jesus' God. He's making sure that we know he's our God. He's our Father. Mary is obedient to the command that Jesus gives. She goes to the disciples who are still gathered together in fear. The scripture says that while they're there, they're weeping and they're crying. And she proclaims the good news to them. "I have seen the Lord." They don't believe. They don't accept. I would like to say that they had. By this time, the 2 disciples who had encountered Jesus on the road are now back with the 11. And so they're there. And so there's the witness that they have, and there's the witness that Mary is giving them. And the rest of the disciples are going, "You guys don't make any sense. You guys are nuts. You guys are overwhelmed in grief." Can you imagine being that foolish? Rejecting the truth from those who have seen the Lord. Did you notice when we read the scriptures together that Jesus did not ask Mary to convince the disciples that he had been risen from the dead? He didn't say, "I want you to write a book with 27 proofs that shows that Jesus is real, and we're going to have a great lesson, and it's only going to take 42 weeks, and so if you just come, we're going to get together, we'll have charts, and we'll have graphs, and we're going to have all kinds of," just, right? No. He doesn't, "I need you to take an apologetics class on your way back to the disciples' house. It's only going to take you 4 or 5 weeks to get there. And so if you just learn all of these kinds of apologetic things, and then you'll be able to talk to them about this truth." No. He just said, "Just tell them that I'm alive." Keep it simple. The same is true for us. When we are commissioned, we're commissioned to tell people that Jesus has risen from the dead. He has conquered death. He died on the cross for our sins, but he rose from the grave victorious over the power of death, and he extends to us the offer that when we put our faith in him, we are going to live forever with him. Some who hear the truth will believe it and be saved, but others, because they don't want to be made a fool of, are going to reject the truth. It was the Apostle Paul who proclaimed this to the believers who lived in Corinth. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate. Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased with the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. It's my assumption that you're here this morning because you're among those who don't want to be a fool. You're among those who want to build your house on the rock. You're among those who have heard the truth and you've embraced the power of the cross, and it is salvation for you. And that you are here to celebrate Jesus' victory over death. That is why we have gathered. But when we leave, there are going to be a lot of people we run into who have believed the lie. And I hope that you take the opportunity to share with them the truth. That he is risen. Thank you. He is risen? He is risen. One more time. He is risen? He is risen. Don't just say it here. We have a hymn of invitation that we're going to be using. Is that right? And use this as a time to commit yourself to